watching the Two Turtle Tom Show live every week, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And tonight we have my friend, William Espenshade. Will, welcome.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everybody that may tune in.
Yeah, we've got people in the chat already. We've got Phil Simpson, Dragon Lair, who's Podrick down in Alabama, and Cheddar may be joining us. So we are really excited tonight to chat about a lizard. We are going out of the shell. I'm going to call these series. Sebastian has joined us. So, yes, we are going out of the shell. You probably know Will from his business, Capitolo Farms, or the Tortoise Forum. But yeah, Will has done all kinds of interesting things with animals over his career. And yeah, tonight we thought we would go out of the shell and talk about Solomon Island skinks, Monkey Tailed Skinks, Prehensile Tailed Skinks, or Corucia zebrata. Why Monkey Tailed Skinks, Will? What do you like about them?
Well, of the common names, Monkey Tailed Skink is the one I prefer mostly because I think it, aside from their having a prehensile tail, and New World monkeys have that, they're mischievous. Prehensile tailed skinks are mischievous. They can be pretty sly and be all nice and sitting on your arm and then creep up your forearm and right where the bend is in your elbow, but from the inside, they'll just take a little nip to see if you're alive and will respond. Um, so I had quite a few in both a private setting and when I worked at the Philly Zoo. Although at the Philly Zoo, I was the relief keeper, but I had a lot of influence in how the colony was changed from large fiberglass covered plywood boxes to vinyl coated wire cages. So that was a big help. I I first got some in 1990, um, and I gotta confess I forget a specific order. There was an entity at the time where the idea was you would buy endangered species when they were being imported in mass and breed them, and then when they became less well imported or more rare, then you could sell them as a profit. The guy who did that had a newsletter, and some of the hallmark animals were tomato frogs and Solomon Island skinks. But that, as a company, went bankrupt after a couple of years, so the guy walked away from it. So there were all these people that were unsupported that maybe didn't know so much about the animals. And someone reached out to Sean, the curator at the Fresno Zoo, and they had several. Um, and so Sean didn't want them for the zoo and talked with the people, and I ended up with them. And I think that was maybe four males and 8 or 9 females.
Oh, wow.
And then about the same time, a friend of mine at the San Francisco Zoo decided he wasn't going to have his anymore, so I got them as well. So I had, I think, 8 colonies of 1.1 to 1.2, and I mostly followed the husbandry criteria that Sean had set up. Now, this is before Advanced Vivarium Systems series of books came out. Philippe de Vaugelet wrote one on prehensile tailed skinks, and before that, I think I forget the first name, but McCoy is the last name of a guy who wrote the book Reptiles of the Solomon Islands. And then Sean had a lot of experience with them. So I ended up setting them all up in wire cages made with PVC coated, PVC vinyl coated wire. So for one, it wouldn't rust, and then all those little harsh knobbies of zinc or whatever is used for galvanizing wouldn't be damaging to their feet. And they're vertical lizards. They're up and down lizards. Horizontal space, cage floor doesn't matter. They don't spend that much time there, if any at all. So I made all the enclosures 18 inches wide and 2 feet deep from front to back and a little over 6 feet tall. And I had a couple trays in there made out of the PVC wire, one to set a food plate in and one to set a water plate in. And those were both at around 4 and 5 feet, so they didn't have to go down low to get to any of that. And primarily what I fed them was mulberry. The origin story of mulberry and my use of herbivorous reptiles comes from there.
Oh, wow.
Neighbor had a giant tree, I mean, probably 50 foot across the crown, and it was pollarded every year. So most of the branches were 3 to 10 feet long every spring with lots of leaves. I would jam each of these enclosures with enough branches where the skinks could effectively hide in and among all the mulberry, as well as have the whole inside of the enclosure, all 6 sides, climbable because it was the PVC coated wire. And I subsequently built some cages like that for a local friend, but I didn't have the PVC wire. I used regular because, frankly, he supplied the wire, and it seemed to work out okay.
Quick question. Were you in California when you had these?
Yeah, I lived in Clovis at the time, Clovis, California. And
so were they outside?
No, the house I had was every 5 to 10 years someone added a new room to the house, and the last room added was in 1962 at the advent of requiring permits to build. So it's a really funky house. But that last room was a pretty darn big laundry room. It was like what some people might call a rumpus room laundry room. And so it became the animal room, and all these enclosures were in there. And I also had aquatic turtles in there, so ambient humidity was always high year round. And I had 2 1500 watt heaters in there, one on a timer, so it would turn on only at night, and its minimum setting was 78. And then the other one, sorry, the 24-hour one was at 78, and then there was a daytime one that would spike the room temperature up to the high 80s.
That's a good idea. I never thought about doing it that way.
It worked really well. And after they had been with me for a couple years, I was getting 1 baby out of every female every year, so I was producing a lot. But at the time, a prehensile tailed skink, you were doing good to get $150, $200 for it. Now I guess they're a couple thousand each. At least that's what they were selling for at the Anaheim show this past weekend.
Those were babies or adults?
Yeah, babies, and males, baby males. Sometimes I price things because I don't really want to sell it. That could have been the motivation behind that seller. So they were a lot of fun. And when I moved from Fresno to Philadelphia to take the job at the Philadelphia Zoo, I didn't bring them with me. I gave them, the whole colony, to a friend who was really into lizards. And I've never had direct communication with that person since. It was my understanding that within a year they had all passed away because there was some not right thing going on with the husbandry. But when you relinquish an animal, you sort of relinquish control or thought about it. I know a lot of people, when they sell an animal, they'll call me up 2 years later, how's it doing? And I'll struggle to figure out, well, who are you and all that. But yeah, so someone wrote Dragon Lair paid $50 each for all of 6 of mine from the Glades in '91. Yeah,
Glades herp.
Ron Tremper published a one-time journal called Perverted Herpetology, just to make fun of his cohort of reptile dealers in North America.
Interesting.
And in that, he made fun of Lloyd Lemke and Cherry Lilly evaluating everything in terms of how many prehensile tailed skinks it was worth. Sort of like now a banana has become a meme of everything's compared to a banana. This weighs 10 bananas or it's 3 bananas long or whatever. So yeah, at a time they were coming in pretty cheap. I understand now they are no longer exported by laws in the Solomon Islands. It's not that the U.S. doesn't import them, but even when the U.S. had declined to import them, they were coming in pretty freely to Canada, and I think more than 1 or 2 people crossed the border with prehensile tailed skinks, because at the time they weren't coming
Hmm.
into the U.S.
Yeah,
Not
I
so.
remember seeing them when I was a kid, and then they kind of went away. It just seemed like, and I was getting into reptiles right when you got that group, like 90, 92. And I remember them being in pet stores.
Yeah. The Dragon Lair says they kept theirs in hardwire cloth cages. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
People that keep them in big PVC enclosures and all, it's like they're vertical up and down climbing lizards, and now you have 4 smooth sides that they can't really utilize. So now you got to have all these branches and all in there. I still use cork bark hollows and branches, but I mostly just shove the enclosures jam packed full of mulberry branches. And pretty far into the winter, after fresh mulberry was no longer available, they were eating all the dry leaves.
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, they preferred to cling to the sides of the enclosure of the wire cloth to defecate and pee than in and among the leaves. So the leaves actually stayed pretty clean. I also learned a harsh lesson there. You got to use 1/2 x 1 at the largest size
Mm.
opening, because 1 by 1, small babies can just go through. And all the adults are pretty careful to not, well, in my case, all the enclosures were contiguous like row homes. The adults from one colony wouldn't kill or hurt babies from another colony, but it made it hard to know who the actual mom and dad was, as they say, because sometimes the babies would prefer to be with different adults than the parents.
Hmm.
Um,
So no
Sometimes
eggs, right? They're ovoviviparous. Is that the
live
right
bear,
term?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, all those tongue twister terms I try to avoid
Yeah.
as much as
I think
possible.
ovoviviparous is the right term. How many are in a litter?
Apparently, the majority is one, but there are
Oh.
individuals that will twin, and I think I recall, like maybe there's a twin and then a daughter, a stillborn. At
Mhm.
the Philly Zoo, where we had a colony, some of the individuals there were huge, like snout to tail tip, getting up to 32, 33 inches. And those
Wow.
giant females would put out 2 babies or really big individual babies.
Hmm.
Um,
What's the
there's a,
gestation like?
yeah, I don't recall that
Yeah.
statistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Were they producing young all the time, or
I
are
got
they
one crop
fecal?
every year.
Okay.
I got an annual crop, or harvest or
Yeah.
birthing period.
Oh, that's
Um,
fascinating.
they were a lot of fun, and something else that I run across with them and talking with people is that they're lateral head movement guys. They
All right.
can't bob their head, so to speak.
Okay.
So at best, you want to have a 1/2 inch water for them to sit in, because they can't pick their head up.
Hmm.
They move it side to side. So if they're in deep water and they get a little panic, they'll drown themselves. Um, and I drowned one
Hmm.
accidentally, and just in an open tray of water where it could get in and out on its own.
Wow.
Um,
They're
so I always
probably not used to see I mean, if they live in the tree their whole life, they don't have that adaptation to go down and drink from a
exactly.
water puddle even. They are in the trees their entire life.
I think
Sounds
so.
like. Wow.
They don't swim when they're in water over their head. They just sort of struggle and drop,
Wow.
or sink. Um, so that's a good cautionary thing to keep in mind if you're going to get some. They move their head side to side,
Hmm.
not up and down. So like an iguana will bob its head up and down,
Yeah.
and even blue tongue skinks can pick their head up and flash that blue tongue at you. Prehensile tailed skinks, their neck is stiff in that plane. They can't pick their head up that way, but they can move it side to side really well. So I guess that's a adaptation to living in and on trees. There's no point to bobbing your head, you might say,
Hmm.
at least for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. They're going up. Do they climb up and down?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their face is in the direction they're headed, whether
Okay.
it's up or down.
So they'll go down.
Uh,
Podrick, he's saying that the ones that he had were a dull lime green, but the ones that he sees now are brownish with bits of green. Do you remember any color variations or differences from what we see now?
not from what we see now. There's a really high quality Facebook group for prehensile tail skinks. Unlike a lot of Facebook groups, which are just sort of like opinion fests. Um, and I think Eric Akaba is the moderator of it. He's
Okay.
had a group of prehensile tail skinks, I think. I forget, but going on 30, 40 years, somewhere in that range. I think he said he's at seventh generation animals now. Maybe, yeah, I shouldn't
Wow.
shouldn't
Yeah.
quote what I don't remember really well, but he's been very consistent for a very long time with reproducing them.
Hmm.
A lot of people like myself have had them and not had them. I definitely going to get some again because I
Nice.
really like them.
Yeah.
And I mean, my company motto is all tourists all the time, because if I said all reptile herbivore all the time, that might be even a little more awkward.
Not as
And
interesting.
so, yeah, I really like them. The other things I fed when I was feeding them is I'd take a potato peeler and just make peels off of a sweet potato, so
Hmm.
like fresh sweet potato chips, and then I would
Hmm.
do that with cucumber and squash, and I fed them a lot of kale and romaine. I hadn't run across escarole at that point in my herbivorous reptile keeping, and I used Vionate and chicken layer crumbles then. Those
Hmm.
were the only things I used. I wasn't using all the dried stuff I have now with intent, although they got dried mulberry leaves, just because I didn't take branches out but once a year or so. Like at the end of winter, when spring and new branches were available, I'd pull out all the old ones, and it'd be a lot. And let's see, leave all the different shades of green and browns in them.
Steven.
Yeah, oh, love. Yeah, I agree. I've seen a lot of variation. Um, when I was at the Philly Zoo, the guy who wrote the vivarium, advanced vivarium system books for Savannah monitors, Michael Balsai or something like that. He had been to the Solomon Islands and wanted to go back to do long-term natural history study on them, but I guess he didn't find the funding.
Hmm.
Then the one of the curators at the Philly Zoo, Brent Spencer, I understand he got a National Geographic grant to do that, but then the zoo decided to reposition him to not employed at the zoo. So I guess that was not going to happen. Um, it does seem like it's an animal where somebody could probably spend a year or two doing a lot of studies, intense in one population, and maybe just a cursory observation of all the populations, because there seems to be I don't know if there are subspecies or population distinct populations, or it's decline or what. Um, a lot of that taxonomy stuff is thicker than weeds.
Sure. What
But
are the Solomon Islands like? I hear of a lot of reptiles that come from there. Have you studied the Solomon Islands at all?
well, it was one idea I had for a thesis is to go
Oh,
to, I think, the Marshall Islands are off the coast of the Solomon Islands, and the Marshall Islands would have had myelenia tortoises, maybe just a few thousand years ago, and I hope maybe I could find fossil nests and all. Anyway, so that
very
led me
cool.
to look at the Solomon Islands, and I think it's French had their imperial political dominance over the Solomon Islands before they gained independence.
Okay.
Maybe they are still somewhat pretty tied to France. Um, I think when you
French
look,
would come in handy.
yeah, well, English and English only.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So Dragon later talked about Sean. Yeah, that was a great experience working at the Chappie Zoo. Um, Sean and I were a clique of two a lot of times,
Yeah.
much to the annoyance of full time keepers because that happened when I was a volunteer there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, of so apparently there's some you were talking about Solomon Islands and
Yeah.
herps there. There's so I think that was the last place that terrestrial crocodiles lived, like crocodiles that spent all their time on land, and they had
Wow.
big molars as opposed to sharp teeth. Um, let's see. There's
Wow.
there's been rumors off and on that there are some kind of side necks there, side neck turtles, like some kind of Chelidina
Hmm.
or Chelid. I don't know if that's true or if someone's followed up on that, or if they have and they have some and they're just keeping it a secret because you know how us turtle people can be at times. Um, and
Sure.
if no one knows about it, they're probably more safe than if a lot of people know until some logging consortium goes in there.
Yeah.
Um, some kind of European elk has been let loose on the island, and big game hunters go there for that. Uh,
Fascinating.
and I think some of the birds of paradise are there, perhaps not.
Hmm.
It it's been a while since I've read much about the
Yeah.
natural history of the Solomon Islands because I did not see it in my cards to go there, and that was usually the driver to read a lot about some places' natural history.
One thing I wanted to do was look at the family relationships within the skinks. I'm assuming that these guys are skinks. They're in the skink family, but not closely related to any other skink, is my guess.
Well, it's a monotypic genus. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Is there anything like it?
well, I'm thinking about taxonomy from a decade or two ago, but at
Sure.
one time they
It's
were
okay.
considered um, affiliated with blue tongue skinks
Hmm.
because of the body size.
Hmm.
However, their overall their body shape and they have the prehensile tail and their arboreal sort of makes me have a hard time seeing that. Um, so I guess it depends how many millions of years ago or hundreds of thousands of years ago the lineage is separated if they were connected at one time.
Yeah.
So
Well, they're really interesting and neat lizards, and they seem like they're becoming popular again. Am I imagining that?
I agree. I absolutely agree. Um, yeah, so some like Jeremy Thompson now
Yep.
apparently has a growing breeding population, um, and Crutchfield Farms apparently has
Hmm.
island specific individuals. So it's not the mutts that most people have in North America. It's we know which islands they came from. So that's makes it more interesting. Um, there's a lot of thought that maybe some pairings don't work because they're
Hmm.
from such disparate populations that they're not genetically compatible. There's a pretty big range in size. There within prehensile tail or monkey tail skinks, there are like smaller populations and much larger populations.
Hmm.
So I sometimes wonder if that's really a reflection on how heavily hunted that population was for food. Like if they've never been hunted for food, you're going to probably have a lot larger or more larger individuals than if they've been hunted for food a lot
Hmm.
smaller. And I don't think it takes too long for hunting pressure to shape that size distribution.
If people could get to them, if they're low enough in the trees, I would think it would be a very easy meal. They're not fast, are they?
They can be pretty quick running
Yeah.
up a tree.
Okay.
I mean, you look at them and you sort of don't see um, a speedy lithe animal like a tree monitor, which
Mm-hmm.
looks like it could run the length of a tree faster than you could blink.
Mm-hmm.
But they can move pretty quick. When they're on the ground, they're pretty awkward, sort of like a koala bear. I guess that
Mm,
could be another good common name for prehensile tail skinks is koala bear lizards.
that's cool.
Koalas can bolt up a tree pretty darn quick, but on the ground they're just awkward. So there's that. I I've seen some with damaged tails and they've done okay, but it certainly seems to be maybe even like an ego issue for them. They know their
Hmm.
tail is damaged and they just never seem to be as perky.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but we had a couple at the zoo with damaged tails that they had come in that way or they were purchased that way and they were never the hallmark breeders.
Hmm. What are the dynamics like? You talked about setting them up in colonies, and sometimes the babies preferring other adults to their parents. Do they have social behaviors that you observed?
Absolutely. When I was selling the offspring, I usually wanted to wait 6 to 9 months before selling one because there's some kind of socialization that comes from the parents. So the babies learn not to be dicks and want to bite every other lizard they see. They understand there are other lizards out there and it's okay to get along with them.
Oh
Um,
wow.
they there's a lot of rational reason to believe they need their gut seeded with the feces of the adults
Uh-huh.
for a microbiome. Um, Now here's something where I completely escaped having to figure it out or be responsible for it. All the groups of skinks I got were already in pairs
Mm,
or triplets, or they were bonded with each other. They knew each other.
mhm.
And at the Philly Zoo, our foreman Joyce was really good at this. She would sort of camp out in the skink room for the day and just watch behavior and introduce a couple together that hadn't been together before, like offspring from group A and offspring from group B, and put them together to see if we'd get a new colony. And she was really talented in sorting out if they were a get along couple or not. And so I actually never had to go through that. And that's some trepidation I have in looking at jumping into prehensile tail skinks again. Um, oh, yeah, if only I could make my brain work so much better than it does. There's a woman that I've only seen on Facebook, Amy, and she has a bunch of um, green tree pythons or emerald tree boas. Anyways, they're all in their individual enclosures, and all the individual enclosures are open into a room, and then there's all this climbing structure in the room. And they come out and they copulate or meet or hang out together. But then when the lights start coming back on again, because they're more nocturnal and crepuscular than they are diurnal, they all go back to their own cage. And so I thought that would be sort of a cool way to do prehensile tailed skinks.
That's cool.
Give them all a home cage that they could get into and out of as they see fit, and then have some kind of big communal area, and maybe let themselves pair each other up. But I could imagine you might end up missing some toes or tail tips with that kind of a strategy.
Hmm.
But it seemed like it'd be I mean, dating online sucks. And I imagine if you just threw some animals together and, well, they're not killing each other, so that's a pair,
Yeah.
is a little different than them choosing each other in more of a free range situation. And I'd like to do the let them choose each other kind of thing.
That's cool.
But that's a experiment for tomorrow.
How do they do by themselves?
I don't think I never kept any by themselves. Um, I know people have, and I imagine when they were ones that I had bred and sold, they knew there were other skinks out there because they were acclimated to being with other skinks in an adult group. But I imagine there are some people that might pull them as soon as they're born and hand rear them so they're all acclimated to being touched and fondled by people. And so then they might do better by themselves because they don't know about socializing with other skinks. That's a pretty speculative answer.
Sure. You and me, we keep animals, we breed animals. But what about someone that wants one of these as a pet?
Well,
you touched on it a little bit. They can be socialized, but are they a pet that you can handle?
they can be like I and now I forget if it was a few moments before we were live and we were chatting or since, but I had one that, I mean, it was going to tear you up no matter what. It, as soon as you open the enclosure, it was calculating how far can I leap to get on that hand and bite it. And it
Wow.
was with the female I called Ethel for Ethel Merman because she liked sitting in the water a lot. So her name was Ethel Merman back when I named pets. And then there were, so that was the extreme. Ethel, you could just reach in and pick up, and she could be dead asleep, no warning, and she's okay with it. But the male she was with was savagely looking to digest a finger just to see if he could, kind of thing. And then I had others that were always sneaky about it. Like you'd put them on your arm or your shoulder, and they would tongue flick and walk around. And then they might give the little loose skin here in your neck just a little nip with the tip of their mouth. So not a savage bite, but sort of like a little toothy kiss just to see if you're paying attention, and pick them up. And then when they do that, I wouldn't necessarily put them back right away because I didn't want to reward going back to the home cage with a bite. So then I would do the thing that parrot people do, where you do hand over hand over hand,
Sure.
a little bit, and then put them back in their home cage. Yeah, most of them were pretty mellow. They didn't like being picked up, but once they were picked up, they just went with it. And I would imagine I see more and more people want to like cuddle their turtle or their bearded dragon and things like this, and there's
their tortoise even.
Yeah, I've seen people put their tortoise up here wrapped in a towel and
Yep.
watch a movie with their tortoise or something. Yeah, that's not my cup of tea. I get it, how people can feel a bond with an animal that way. I like my cat because he yells at me all the time. I want food, clean my litter box, top off the water bowl. I mean, he comes and tells me what's going on. Tortoises just complain by banging on things or ramming things. I think prehensile tailed skinks are somewhere in between there. They understand that you can be a segue to food or to be picked up here and set down there. I always thought it'd be cool when I was in Fresno. I planted some mulberry trees to just put something on the ground outside the rain shadow of the trees. So if they went to the ground or fell, they couldn't get away, like maybe a roofing tin fence, and just let some go in the mulberry tree. Um, but I didn't feel confident with that because there are a lot of crows in the neighborhood, and um, once crows figure something out, they just will not leave it alone. And red-tailed hawks and things like that. A single mulberry tree isn't dense enough um, to do that. I guess if there was like a mulberry tree with honeysuckle or something like that in it, where it got really dense, that would work.
Hmm.
Also, I fed them a lot of pothos or
Sure.
devil's ivy, whatever you want to call it. Um,
It's from the Solomon Islands, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's from Southeast Asia
Okay.
too. I mean, like there's it's a natural thing in um, southern part of Vietnam, if not central and northern, and Cambodia and Laos and places like that. So there might be more than one species, but um, one of the common names for it is devil's ivy or
Yeah.
Solomon ivy or something like that. My girlfriend at the time worked at a bank, and her real passion was houseplants. And so she took care of all the houseplants at all the branches. Like if the bank closed at 3, she would still work till 5 and go to different branches and take care of houseplants there. So she would sometimes bring home trash bags full of pothos, and I'd put it in all the enclosures, but they wiped it out so fast. There'd be, I mean, you would need a substantive greenhouse with a lot of it growing and very few skinks for that to be not grazed down to nothing. Um, the mulberry worked really well.
Wow.
Um,
What, I
and
mean, they sound like very intelligent lizards. Do they? I
um,
mean, you think do they show problem solving abilities, being able to climb through the trees and things like that?
I have a bias thinking arboreal animals are typically smarter than terrestrial
Hmm.
animals because they got to not fall out of a
Yeah,
tree all the time,
exactly. Constantly.
and that demands a little more, um, at least evolved intelligence, if not real time
Hmm.
thinking. And I mean, even with arboreal pit vipers, somehow seem smarter than the slugs that lay on the ground in the leaf
That is
litter.
so cool.
Um, so yeah, I'm sure I stepped on some terrestrial pit viper keepers of that comment. Sorry,
Haha, it's
no
okay.
offense intended.
Hey, we're turtle people,
Um,
so.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I don't know how to answer
Yeah.
your question per se, because I guess to answer something like that, I'd want to like somehow create a challenge
Hmm.
that's novel to them and see how long it took them to solve or get through the challenge, some kind of maze or
Hmm.
tool use or whatever.
Sure.
Tool in that sense being a rope that might swing as opposed to one that's taut and stationary. A lot of animals show a lot more adaptability and ability to figure things out than I think they're typically given credit for. Um,
Have you
it,
ever seen Mark Rober's YouTube videos about his backyard squirrels and their problem solving ability?
yeah, I think that's wonderful. I like most everything that guy produces.
Yeah,
He's pretty smart and
it's
clever, and he's fun to listen to.
like he needs to do Monkey Tailed Skinks and evaluate them. I mean, because they I don't know. There's just something about them when you look at them. They're different. Those like
Yeah,
gold eyes.
well, and they're the largest skink. Um, there
Podrick
are,
says they hate being on their backs.
yeah, I never recall that. They certainly don't mind their being swaddled by wedging themselves up somewhere where both their stomach and their back are in intimate contact with something like between two branches or in a tight court bark. But actually having them upside down on their back, I would imagine that that would not be acceptable position at all.
Not fun. Steven says they shred your arms with those sharp nails.
Well, if they're just sitting on your arm, they don't. But if you're trying to control them and they want to go and you don't want them to go, then the only thing that provides traction are those nails. They also have a certain rubberiness to their foot pad
Hmm.
that so they can walk across a smooth, wet surface where the claws would have be no help, and they can still move themselves. So, but the claws, absolutely, yeah, they can rip pretty good.
Wow, that's really cool. Well, is there anything else that we should know about this really cool species of lizard?
Well, if you do end up with one and you haven't, be prepared to like really become fascinated by them. Um, they stay pretty nocturnal, but I recall even at the zoo, I mean, we had a day shift, we didn't have a night shift, and so they knew when food was coming and they would come out right away. So their their natural nocturnal behavior will modify to encounter you with the food coming in. Or in the case of that one male I was talking about, where the female was named Esther Williams. I forget his name, by the way. Um, he would instantly become awake or aware anytime I was in the room because he was constantly eyeballing and trying to figure out how am I going to bite that guy. He just really wanted to bite anybody. Um, but I think most of them are pretty mellow and just look at you. They're sort of like blue-tongued skinks. They'll actually rotate their eye in their socket to eyeball you. So if they're just sort of like staring off into the void and you walk in the room, they rotate their pupil to eyeball you and see what you're up to.
Wow.
And that's something I like in the animal when it looks at you like you, not just some amorphous blob floating around. Um,
It knows you're there.
yeah, absolutely. I think they can tell different people as well. Like
That's really cool.
that person doesn't do anything for me, and that's the person with food,
Hmm.
at least at that level.
That is so cool. Ryan and I were just talking to Zach Loafman about wood turtles, and he was telling us that his wood turtles recognize the keeper that brings them food. And that just blew my mind. Oh, wow. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This is a great opportunity for me to learn about a lizard that I've seen all my life, but I just don't know all that much. Um, how close do you think you are to adding a group?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. um, so I've had a lot of things get turned upside down in my life in the last couple of years.
Sure.
COVID being the more mild of the things among them, and I got the blue tongue skink that I have because a friend that is near here wanted to get them to somebody who wasn't just going to flip it, so he gave it to me.
Hmm.
Um, and that sort of really re-sparked my interest. I actually have an enclosure ready to go
Okay.
for prehensile tailed skink, so it's a matter of feeling I can carve out being responsible for more animals.
Yep.
I've been letting tortoises go out on breeding loans or selling or trading to reduce the tortoise load. Not that I don't like them, but I feel I had more animals than I was giving their due to in terms of care. And I would say prehensile tail skinks are somewhat more high maintenance than a tortoise, less than a cat or dog, but
Hmm.
um, they need fresh food. I think pretty much every day. I don't think they would be a lizard that would be good with a fasting day.
Okay.
Like the tortoises, they're okay with a fast once in a while, but I don't think that'd be okay with the prehensile tail skinks.
Mhm. So commitment, you have to um, really decide that you want to bring this additional responsibility on, like
Absolutely,
any animal, right?
absolutely.
Right. Well, thank you again. Thank you to everyone that joined us tonight. Podrick, Sean, McZoo, Reptile Show reporter. Check Sean's show out at 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. You can watch his show Wednesday, and then this show, the Two Turtles Tom Show, live on Thursday nights, 8 p.m. I have a whole playlist that I'll put a link to. You can listen to more of my interviews with turtle experts and tortoise experts. Tonight, we brought in a turtle and tortoise expert, Will, to talk about a lizard. So we'll do this from time to time. We'll go out of the shell. Will, thank you so much.
Out of the shell. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the invite.
You're welcome.